Mary, it's delightful to be able to talk to you for this recording. Thank you for making the time. You've been in foster care for a long time. Can you tell us a little bit about your family? You have children of your own, I believe. You've got foster children as well. How does it all work?
Yeah, hi Patrick. So yeah, in our family we have 2 biological sons and 3 sons in care. And so we have been fostering for our first placement actually turns 8 tomorrow. So
8.
Yeah. So we began the journey about 8 years ago. And we have him and his little brother who's 6 and an older foster son who's 14. And then we have 2 biological sons who are 12 and 14. So house of boys.
A house of boys.
Yeah.
And did you have 2 foster children at once? Was that how the first 2 came in, or did they come in separately?
Came in separately. So when people go through their fostering training and the process, it's quite an in-depth process now in Australia to make sure you understand the needs of the children coming into you, but also you've got the time to prepare yourself and your family for what you're doing. And our 2 sons were 4 and 3 at the time. And so we kind of wanted someone younger than our youngest, which is also a policy position to try and not upset the birth order in a family.
Yeah.
We didn't necessarily say newborns, but that ended up being the first placement that we were offered that would work for our family. And so we said yes to him. So he did have to spend 11 weeks in hospital withdrawing from drugs and alcohol, which was really tough start to life for him. But he entered our home as a newborn, and then it was actually at his first birthday with his birth parents, which we had with them, and they said, hey, guess what, we're pregnant. And things were going pretty well for them at the time. So, of course, for them, we were hopeful they would get to keep their youngest son. But in the end, he came into care and has lived with us. They've both lived with us their whole lives.
Yeah. What took you into foster care?
Yeah, so it's a bit of a surprising way that we got there. So I studied international development and refugee law and thought that's where my life would be heading. And then came to know God in my early 20s, and kind of that hope that I'd always wanted to give to people overseas in developing countries, and particularly felt called to the refugee space. I suddenly realised the hope of God gave all of that purpose. And then when I had my own 2 children, that idea was put on hold, not wanting to take a family over there, somewhere into that situation. And so foster care just seemed like a way of living out that calling of caring for the vulnerable locally here. But it wasn't really until we began the fostering journey and got to know the children and their birth families and entered the system that we realised how much that actually is living out our Christian faith. And also, I think God only reveals things to you when you're at the right time. So the other thing that clicked is my mother-in-law grew up in care. She was one of 11 children who grew up in care, and my husband had never actually known his mum's story until we began our fostering journey, and then we learnt more about that. And it was actually a Christian home for 3 months of her journey at about 14 years old that totally changed the trajectory of her life.
Wow.
So it was going to church on a Sunday, then meeting her now husband, and that 3 months meant her life was changed and her children's lives were changed, and now my children are a beneficiary of that.
Yeah, there's that verse in Hebrews 13, I think it is, practice hospitality because you may be entertaining angels unawares. And we just don't know the impact of what we do on people's lives. That's an astonishing impact.
Yeah.
For just living with a family for a 3-month period.
Yeah.
Turns somebody's life around, and then that affects their children and their grandchildren. It's an amazing story.
Yeah.
So your own biological children were quite young when you took this new baby in. Did they understand that you hadn't been pregnant and suddenly there was this new bub in the family?
Yeah, they understood enough of what it was. And because he was in hospital for that 11 weeks, we were actually going in twice a day to visit him. And so our youngest wasn't at school yet, so he would come with me to visit him, and we've still got all the stickers and drawings he did for him around his cot.
Right, right.
Yeah, and again, not planning newborns. Newborn is a really easy way, a natural way to enter a family. So they've grown up with him and his brother and their behaviours. And I sometimes think if they arrived in our house as a 4-year-old with the behaviours they have, it would have probably been a lot harder adjustment. But our 2 sons just get them. It's actually my 14-year-old's birthday today as we talk, and I was reflecting dropping them all at school. I just wish we had a birthday which weren't taken over by the behaviours of the little 2. But our boys don't feel that because it's just their normal and they're fine with it. So
Yeah.
Yeah.
So then you took on a 3rd boy, and how did that child fit in with the 4 others? How did the 4 others receive this new member of the family?
So yeah, his story, he went to he's the same age as our eldest son, and they were at school together. And I knew things were tough for him and his mum, so I'd actually been quite intentionally supportive of her, and we'd have him over, try and help out with lifts to sport and those kind of things. And when he was removed, he actually ended up in another family connected with Fostering Hope. And they called us saying, hey, we've got one of your son's friends staying with us. And I straight away called his mum to check she was okay. And that was pretty amazing. We went for a long walk just around where we lived and just talked and just about where she was at and how she was going. And so she actually asked if he would come live with us. We met with him and he asked if he could live with us. And we later found out the school principal was also recommending that as well. And so because at that stage our boys were 8 and 6, so a little bit older, so we did talk to them about it, and they knew him, went to school with him. And something that's just really stuck out in my mind since then is that they said, well, if a kid needs a home, of course they could live with us. So for them, even the concept that a child isn't in a home that they're loved wasn't a concept they knew, because they'd always had that and taken that for granted.
Yeah.
And in lots of ways, he's completely different personality, completely different interests. And there's just been no competition. It's been pretty amazing.
It's a big transition for a child.
Yeah.
Really big. And we have to be generous and patient with them as they adjust to new parents and then new siblings and all the chaos of 5 different boys in the household.
Yeah.
It's a big shift. What have been the highs and lows for you of being a foster carer?
Yeah, I'll start with the highs. So I think it's just an absolute honour to have another child call you mum, and that's not to take away from their birth mum and the role that is, but just to have them trust you in that role as a mother is just amazing, and something you can never take for granted. And you realise probably for me, I realised how I took it for granted for my own biological children as well. Mm-hmm. So it's just such a special role to play. A high is doing life with other foster and kinship carers. They're just amazing people to do life with. They inspire me every day. The way they speak of birth families, the way they put the needs of these children in, just at the centre of their lives, and the way they care for them is just amazing. So they're great people to do life with. Yeah. And the lows are you're working in a broken system. No children should be removed from their families. And so when it's entering a system that's broken, it's entering a system that we don't often know what the best outcome or the best interest of the child is. Is it to go back to birth family? Is it to stay in foster care? And so while you're riding that journey where a lot of that's uncertain, that's really hard. And you're working with different child safety officers who are coming with a different perspective, and trying to honour them and respect the role they have, but also then advocating for the needs of the children in the middle of that is a challenge. And the behaviours of the children can be really challenging, and a lot of care, I think all the carers we work with, get out of their way to understand trauma and things like fetal alcohol spectrum disorder and everything, but you can understand it all, but still in that moment, it can be really challenging.
Yeah. Now you mentioned behavioural problems with your own boys, and you took two of them as almost newborns. So they've had a loving, stable home for all but 10, 11 weeks of their lives. Tell me about behavioral issues which arise even when a child is taken into care that young.
Yeah, I think the research now is saying that in utero and birth trauma, so in utero trauma can include drugs, alcohol, exposure to domestic violence, high levels of stress. That trauma and the trauma that happens at birth is actually the way the brain forms. So it's almost can be more seen as brain damage in a way. So that trauma is really hard to heal from. Whereas then trauma that can happen outside from, they say trauma, but in utero and birth trauma is harder to heal from than trauma that can happen from 2 to 12 years old, because the brain, then it's more of the memories that you're retraining the brain as opposed to the way the brain's actually formed. And so those behaviours are really common ones are lack of ability to emotionally regulate. So if something's happening and they perceive it as dangerous or scary or unjust, that will come out in their behaviour. It's really common for kids in care to lack empathy and also lack gratitude, which for a lot of people is probably one that really grates when you're trying to do a good job and they're not thankful. But they just don't have those parts of the brain just aren't formed like ours.
Brain has an amazing way of healing. Even from that kind of trauma. So, it's not a short term. It's a longer term thing, isn't it? Of creating that stable, caring, nurturing environment and having to deal with those behaviours, but putting boundaries around the kids. Yeah,
and changing parenting. So a lot of carers struggle with what is considered traditional parenting versus therapeutic parenting. And I encourage all the carers connected with Fostering Hope that therapeutic parenting is better anyway, but it's what our kids need to know that they're okay regardless of what's happening with the behaviours.
Yeah, and that's been your personal journey we've been talking about so far, but you founded Fostering Hope, and why?
So when, as I said, it was only really we were on the journey that we realised, wow, this is living out our faith in every single way. And we've never heard it talked about at church. We've never heard on Christian radio station or at a Christian event there be a table with information about foster care. So we connected with some other Christian carers in Hobart, where I'm based, and the four couples got together and said, we want to start something. We want to have this conversation in the churches. And that's really where Fostering Hope started. And we connected with Home for Good in the United Kingdom and Christian Alliance for Orphans in America. So trying to, look at what's happening around the world and how we can work with what's best practice.
And are you just based in Tasmania, or do you have any carers who are on the mainland, as they say?
We're only based in Tasmania, but we do have, we run a buddy program. So new carers, we give them a buddy for the first 12 months of their journey. And we've had buddies from all over Australia because we want Christian carers connected with Christian carers.
Yeah.
And we'd love to be other places.
But that's an important thing, to have a buddy just for that first 12 months and somebody to talk to about the experience. And
to ask the silly questions, which sometimes you don't want to ask your child safety officer.
Yeah. What are you trying to achieve through Fostering Hope?
At the moment in Australia, there's more children in care than we have families for them. And unfortunately, the number of children entering care is increasing and the number of carers is decreasing each year. So what we really believe is this calling to love the orphan, love the fatherless, put the lonely in families, like you said before, hospitality. That's something we really believe Christians could solve this problem in Australia and find more than enough families for children that need them. So that's what we're trying to do, is raise awareness in the Christian community, ultimately find carers, support the carers that are out there, and equip churches to understand these children as well and the behaviours, because the last thing we want is carers living out their faith and then feeling they can't come to church because of the children's behaviours. So having churches as a safe place in a community, we try and encourage carers to think about who could be their respite carer. So when you're beginning your journey, who's someone already on your team, and that hopefully could be someone from their church or their extended family.
Now, Mary, this is a new concept, because from my experience going back to the 1990s and looking at legislation in New South Wales on foster care, you really had the foster carers, and then you had the agency which had placed them. That might be the department, or it might be a non-government agency. But you have this concept of a team, and you have this concept of respite care. Can you talk us through how this changes the whole work of foster care?
Yes, what we're trying to, ultimately our work's all about the children and finding a family for the child. And when you think of a child removed from their birth family, they're also removed from their extended family, they're removed from their community. And so how can we equip a family, a fostering family, to offer that child a family and that extended family and community? And children are very aware if they're being sent to respite or being paid to be looked after. So if from the beginning we have a team around the child, so that team is a prayer team around the fostering family, whether that's their small group or whatever it might work in their context, but also a respite carer from the beginning who is on the team, and that child doesn't ever even feel like they're going to respite, but they're going to extended family and to community. And we also run a mentor program. So again, lots of people might not be able to do foster care, but I think there's a whole lot of Christians out there that could be mentors for children in care. And again, that's that one other safe adult in the child's life that's there for the child. But what we found with our mentors is the carers love it as much too, and the mentors are loving it. Our commitment's a couple of hours a month. They all exceed that commitment because they just are enjoying the relationship so much.
It's kind of like being a very active godparent to a child, isn't it?
Yeah.
When my son was growing up, I had a family who I could lean on, and who took an interest in him. And if I had to be away, that they look after him. And it was just such a blessing to have that support. Yeah. And even more so with foster care, I guess.
Yeah, and I think people, as part of our role educating the church, we've had Christians say to us, why do these children need mentors and not other children? And when you think of how many adults they don't have those safe adults in their life, and their outcomes could be not good. So the more safe adults we can put in their life, the better those outcomes can be. And a lot of the research will say it takes just one caring adult to change the trajectory of a child's life. And now these kids have hopefully great fostering families, but having someone outside that makes such a difference.
Yeah, and they can give different things to that child.
Yeah.
What about relationships with the birth families? You've got a tension here. A lot of foster carers, I'm sure, would like to be able to provide a long-term stable home, but that's not how the system works. And there may be a reconciliation plan with the foster carers, all sorts of things. Can you talk about some of the highs and lows, I guess, of connecting with the birth family? Yeah. Or often it's just the birth mother because dad's off the scene.
Yeah, so as you say, so in Australia, so each state and territory has different child safety, child protection legislation, but overarching, the goal is always reunification or restoration. So a child's removed because of safety concerns, and then the department will work with that family to address the safety concerns. So carers need to know they're going into that system. That's the purpose of the system. And ultimately, if you can see that if the family's addressing the concerns and they want the child back, being carers can be part of that team and be part of that restoration process. So I haven't had, in my family, we've had no reunifications, restorations, but I've walked alongside families that have. And when it works, it's just amazing, where the carers then end up becoming the respite carers. So the children are reunified, and then one weekend a month, the carers have the family. Or we walked along another family, the mum, it was a domestic violence situation. So once the partner was in jail, they helped the mum get a house, get it set up, and she was able to have her 3 children home again. So when you can see it's going to work, and then it's an amazing thing. But it can be really, really hard. We've walked along other carers where just isn't the best, from what they perceive, not the best decision for children to be reunified. And that's heartbreaking for everybody.
Yeah.
And some carers we have one family and they just wouldn't take any more placements, and because they felt those children would end up back in care and they wanted to be ready if that happened. And that happened in that case, and those 2 boys are back in there, they're back with them. So I think it is definitely a part of the fostering journey and something that you need to go into. We run a preparation for fostering course every term, and actually that's something people from all over Australia have done. And a lot of the focus of that is checking your own motivations and making sure you're ready, you're being there to be a family for a child, not getting a child for your family. Yes. And that slight change of thinking going into the journey, I think is important. But as you say, it's not easy. And we've ridden the wave with our little 2. We've gone increased, visits with their birth parents have increased so that it looks like reunification is going to happen, and then something happens and it stops. So it is a bit of a wave that you need to ride. And I like to think of that's the adult problems I've got to deal with. But for the kids, every day it's just their childhood. And, they don't get to be 2 again or 3 again or 10 again. So they've just got to have as regular and normal childhood as possible. And I can offer them that while they're with me.
And you've got to try to keep your emotions quarantined, haven't you? So the children don't feel a sense of instability or uncertainty.
And respect and honour their birth parents as well. That's really a big role as carers, and I think particularly as Christian carers, to be able to always be offering hope and dignity in those relationships.
If I were the minister in charge of child welfare in Tasmania, I think I'd thank God every day for fostering hope. What would you say to a Christian person or a Christian couple who are thinking about possibly going down the foster care journey?
I'd encourage them to continue to get in touch and do one of our preparation for fostering devotionals. I think it just prepares you to ask the right questions of yourself and as a couple, and to pray about the decision. And then if you decide to continue on and go through the formal foster care training, to begin at the right time having conversations with who you want on your team from the beginning.
Fantastic. Mary, thank you so much for sharing your journey with us.
No, thank you, Patrick.